Humanity has not always looked into the future and seen the specter of our extinction looming at the true end of history. The end of everything had to be discovered, just like anything else. It was only with the unearthing of countless species that no longer walked among us that we realized that we could share the same fate. I'm Dawn Nakagawa, president of the Berggruen Institute in Los Angeles, and this is Futurology. The term paradigm shift was conjured up a little more than 60 years ago by the science historian Thomas Kuhn to describe the cycle of birth, life, and death that prevailing wisdom undergoes. Some of the most consequential paradigm shifts in the history of humanity took place in our understanding of time itself. In this episode, we're speaking with Thomas Moynihan, a historian and prolific writer. Moynihan is interested in how society's framing of time and human extinction have developed over millennia. In recent centuries, as we peeled back the strata of deep time, the lifespan of our universe has expanded and contracted by eons, eras, and epochs, with each step forward in our scientific understanding. In retrospect, worldviews that were taken for granted, such as the widely held belief that the universe would cease to be if we weren't there to experience it, quickly became silly, wrong-headed, and backwards. But as Kuhn wrote, the true test of paradigms is whether they are good predictors of what's to come. And a lot is coming. We are fostering a worldwide brain, a form of planetary sapience with innumerable eyes, appendages, and intelligences embedded within. There's a term for this process, cephalization. Like an octopus that holds its awareness distributed across its arms and throughout its body. There may yet be no paradigm that reveals where this neurosphere of human connectivity leads. Is it ushering us into a new era of interconnectedness and utopian abundance? Or is it exponentially hastening humanity's endgame? Moynihan is a research affiliate at Cambridge University's Center for the Study of Existential Risk. He is the author of 3 books, including X-Risk: How Humanity Discovered Its Own Extinction. He's also an affiliate researcher at Berggruen Institute's very own Antikythera program, which works to develop a philosophy of technology that can live up to our present moment of immense change. The director of that program is Benjamin Bratton, a philosopher of technology and speculative design. They sat down together on the sidelines of Berggruen Institute's Planetary Summit in Venice, Italy, to discuss the beginning and end of it all. And now, Thomas Moynihan and Benjamin Bratton on Futurology.
Hi, Thomas. Really looking forward to the conversation. One of the ways which we maybe sort of enter into this is to think about this moment that we're in as a kind of pre-paradigmatic moment that arguably a lot of conventional ideas about what is the difference between life and intelligence and technology and all of these kinds of things that may have seemed pretty stable for a while seem like they're getting mixed up in a lot of interesting ways, both in a literal material sense, like synthetic biology or artificial intelligence, but also maybe even more profoundly in a philosophical sense, in a conceptual sense, scientific sense, that there's a new paradigm perhaps emerging. But before we get into the future, I want to talk to you a little bit about the past. You're a historian. You're a historian who helps us, I think in a really important way, help us understand what this present moment, in fact, might be, where we might locate it within a much longer arc and trajectory than we might used to be being seen. So let me just start from the beginning. How did you end up as a historian? What does your do you think of yourself that way?
Yeah, that's a good question, which involves the history of me in some way, I guess.
Yeah, please.
So I think it can be traced back to when I was a small child. My dad used to read books to me, which were very ambitiously above my kind of level at that age. Say I was like 10, and he would read, I remember him reading Wonderful Life by Stephen Jay Gould to me. a 10-year-old's not going to understand that at all. You know, a 10-year-old can't even say Anomalocaris. You know, that's one of the species from the Cambrian era. But a 10-year-old can look at a book cover. And so the cover of Wonderful Life, at least the edition that my dad read it to me from, shows a really beautiful old illustration of these amazing animals from the Burgess Shale. And so to explain briefly, you know, what the Cambrian was it was the first era wherein metazoan animals, like animals in the way that you and I would recognize, multicellular, capable of moving, emerged, and they emerged quite suddenly. So that's what we talk about when we talk about the Cambrian explosion. So these were the first animals in some sense. And the thing about them is they're so alien. They're so unrecognizable. They're very different from the things that we now have on Earth. Or it is one of those moments where a child just latches onto something. This idea that life used to be so much different from what we can now, you know, look at. And I guess much later on, forward wind, you know, a couple of decades, and I'm, you know, studying, you know, reading at university, and I noticed there's a similar thing with ideas. Obviously, it's a much shorter timescale. With the Cambrian explosion, we're talking about 500 million years ago. With ideas, you know, particularly when it comes to science, 500 years ago. So a much different timescale, but I would say like a similar level of complexity potentially.
And unrecognizability.
Oh yes, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely.
How could they have thought that?
Yeah, yeah, and it's you know, the things that people used to think in the past that are just completely outlandish to us now, but were serious theories at the time. It was that struck me, and
give us a good example.
Okay, so I've got a whole bag of these, but like I'll pick one out. So a great one is that people used to think that suns, as in stars, were inhabited. The surface of those had living beings on them. The first place I found it being said actually goes back to the medieval era. So Nicholas of Cusa, quite an unorthodox theologian, was one of the first Christian thinkers to think about aliens. And so he said, well, it would be a massive waste of space if in the vastitude of the cosmos, God had just put these rocks out there that weren't occupied by, you know, living, thinking.
So they must be. Yeah,
so they must be. Because
how long did that persist?
So that idea that, you know, everywhere is filled with life persisted at least until 1900. But in particular, this idea that the sun is, like, suns are inhabited, the surface of suns must have living, thinking. They called them Solarians, and it was a really popular idea for a very long time. William Herschel, who's recognized as you know, one of the greatest astronomers of the Enlightenment, one of the first to really kind of map the size of the cosmos with some of the large, you know, the first very large reflecting telescopes. Yeah, he was convinced that the when we look at the sun, we're seeing this kind of luminescent outer cloud layer, but underneath that, there's something quite similar to a planet, and there's cities and intelligent creatures, which strikes,
And as in many ways, you know, even much more recently, it's really only been, when we think about it, the last 20, 30 years that really astronomy, we've learned really definitively how alone we are in the universe. And, you know, even into the 1970s and 80s, the presumption was that once we just turn on the receiver, so to speak, we'll be able to join this galactic conversation all around us. And one of the things I want to sort of make sure to touch on right away is not only this, as you talk about this, this history of life, as you say, from the Metazoa era, but also the history of ideas. And I think what makes your work really interesting and important is, like, for you, these things are really closely tied together. And so historians may talk about, you know, the history of humans and various intrigues and conflicts and the rest of this, but you kind of go much, much deeper into this, and how ideas emerge from the evolution of life and all this and so forth. One of the key ideas of your book, X Risk, How Humanity Has Discovered Its Own Extinction, ties this together, I think, in a really provocative way. But I'd like to unpack with you a little bit, and that is this shift from an understanding, a human understanding of the future, as one that was based on what you call apocalypse, or a kind of eschatology, which is, as I take it, an idea that if humans were to disappear, that somehow the universe would disappear, or that our place in the universe is such that the end of one is the end of the other. And what your book shows is that it's actually extraordinarily recent that humans, as a form of thinking life, came to the conclusion that we could go extinct. And what I'd like to sort of ask you to talk to us a little bit about that history in this way. That is, that shift from apocalypse to extinction is also a shift, and correct me if you don't see it this way, between a determined future, a deterministic future, where it kind of doesn't matter what happens because we know the end of the story, to an open-ended future, a non-deterministic future, in which the ideas that we have now, the decisions that we make, the initial conditions that we set, could go in so many different directions. And to me, this implies a kind of openness that is actually quite optimistic. But I wonder if you wouldn't normally think of like extinction as being good news in this way, but I wonder if could you just tell us a little bit about that story, and if you see the philosophical implications in the same way?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll try and disentangle the extinction apocalypse thing first.
Please. Yeah.
And then, because it does tie into this idea of the discovery or even the invention of an open-ended future. But to start with extinction, I wrote a book on the history of the idea of the end, which many people have done before. But I think what I did, which hadn't been done before, potentially, was arguing that extinction over and above apocalypse is a crisply novel idea, a modern idea, an idea that didn't exist before a certain point in time. Now, when I say that, people often raise an eyebrow and they point to their favorite religious tradition, because religious traditions, they all deal with the end in some way, maybe with some exclusions. But worldviews have to have a beginning, middle, and end. And religion, part of its power is that, particularly revealed religion, can answer any question. So, all of them talk about the end. The difference, though, is invariably in religious traditions, when they imagine the end of humanity, they imagine it coinciding with the end of the entire universe. Now, when we're talking about extinction today, I think most of us acknowledge the fact that if our species were to die out, the entire universe by itself, in its independent vastness, would continue. It would persist. There would be a universe, but a universe without humans in it. But also, more importantly, a universe that has no independent, inherent tendency to manifest the things that we value, the things that we care about, the things that we cherish.
Such as?
Well, I mean, we all cherish different things to a degree, but joy, beauty, complexity, there's when we look out into the vastness of the cosmos, the evidence has accumulated quite heavily over the centuries that most of it is inorganic rock or radiation. It's not complex things doing interesting things,
right? Or thinking about it for that,
or thinking about them, right?
Yeah.
And that's to your point earlier.
Yeah.
There's a history of life, but there's also a history of life figuring out there's a history of life,
right?
But this all takes part in that. And another point on the religious apocalypse versus extinction bifurcation is, particularly in the Islamo-Judeo-Christian tradition, the apocalypse is seen as the consummation of the moral order within the universe.
Kind of final reckoning.
Final reckoning. So the good is sorted from the bad. Justice is made manifest, even if it's inscrutable to us mere mortals in some way.
And that this is essentially a kind of automated process.
Yes,
built into time.
It's coming down the track, regardless of what, and also another point is, during the Middle Ages, many people really, really actively wanted it to happen because, it would.
And today, I fear.
Oh yeah, well, that's another conversation. But yeah, because it would relinquish them of their earthly torments, and then you'd get eternal bliss if you'd behaved well. But this idea that the end of time is also the consummation of the moral order, whereas in extinction, it's the end of the moral order,
because the extinction of humans would be the end of
moral agents.
The source of the idea of a moral order, of the idea of justice, or the idea of these sorts of things as well, which are
absolutely,
which mind is essentially projecting or imposing upon the universe in this sort of way.
Because there's no longer, after the death of God, there's no longer a great moral agent in the sky who's orchestrating the symphony of existence. That's no longer there. There is no longer a conductor. And so the universe is going to do its thing without us. And so that's where I, try and encapsulate that in a pithy line. But that's where I talk about how apocalypse secures a sense of an ending, whereas extinction anticipates only the ending of sense.
Right. Okay. Now, in your framing of this actually positions the human, or the human mind at least, as an agent with potentially cosmic significance. Instead of sort of diminishing the status of the human, actually elevates it in some way. And so the idea of a human exceptionalism that might be derived from what you're proposing is maybe more exceptionalism in the sense of anomalous. That of all the forms of life, that there are particular ones that are capable of of even asking those questions, of formulating the question of agency, the question of choice, the question of indeterminacy, and that this is actually quite precious.
Yeah, absolutely. So an interesting aspect of the pre-modern medieval worldview is that humans, insofar as they are moral agents, are completely unexceptional. If you look at the medieval Ptolemaic cosmos, humans actually do occupy a relatively ignoble part of creation, because we're only one layer above the basement, which is hell. And then as you go outwards, you get these concentric spheres where the angels live in the rising hierarchy.
So we were kind of on the bottom floor.
Yeah, we're like ground floor. Yeah, hell's the basement.
Yeah.
And you'll notice, there's a rising hierarchy of angels by, moral dignity. Again, notice that moral hierarchy here is literally the structure of the physical universe. There is no distinction between the two.
It's a big org chart.
Yeah, big org chart, exactly, yeah. And then, you get to the outside and that's where God lives. In that cosmos, and it is an encapsulated cosmos, in that cosmos, there is no part of creation that is not occupied by some form of moral agent. Now, of course, they weren't using those terms. They were talking about souls or demons or humans or angels. There's not a single vacuum of agency or something that.
So we were just sort of one among many.
Yeah, we were just a part of creation that was different because it was the human part, but the whole of creation was imbued with moral agency. Whereas to zoom forwards centuries post Copernicus, it's an open question, and that's why astrobiology is a thriving field. In my eyes, it needs as much resource as possible to go into it. But so far, we have found no sign of cosmic mind. We found no sign of other things doing the thing that we do. And that also includes life itself, just metabolic, complex things, again, doing interesting things.
Which is a very different
Very
cosmology.
different. Yeah.
It's a different it's a very different org chart if there's only if there's this
absolutely
moral agent that is
very different cosmic census. Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, it goes to your point on human exceptionalism is we are literally exceptional, and all life on this earth is all exceptional as well. Like post-Darwin, we know that none of the species on Earth are ever reappearing elsewhere in the universe because they were all created by a 4 billion year chain of events
and they all contain that history within them.
They all contain that history within them. I mean, we're all like a genetic memory bank that is 4 billion years old. But at each step along that way, was
as we are, each one of us, 4.5 billion years old.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe 14 billion, I should say.
Sure.
But because we're all created by the output of the Big Bang. We're all made of that stuff. But each step along that way, each coupling, all of us are the product of a chain of parents that goes back to the beginning of life. Each coupling was drenched with chance. It could have gone otherwise. Again, life is the way it is today because certain creatures procreated to the exclusion of others that possibly could. And so, so that's just to put that into relief, is all species are exceptional. They're not happening elsewhere on other worlds. And so it's also, in my eyes, a massive tragedy when any species goes extinct, because it's disappeared from the entire future of the universe until the end of time, insofar as our best knowledge tells us. But to get to the human exceptionalism point, we are exceptional. The modern, our best current worldview of the biggest possible picture tells us that there will never be other humans elsewhere. If we die here, we're gone forever. And so the story of us discovering our extinction is actually more fundamentally the story of us discovering that we're a cosmically endangered species, and all species are again, because there won't be humans on other worlds. And I should contextualize that with the fact that for the longest period of time, that's what people assumed. They assumed
there's creatures like us everywhere.
Yeah, creatures like us, or literally humans. So a good story that I found recently. I was looking through old editions of a popular science magazine from the UK. And it was a 1903 edition, and it was the letters to the editors. And there was a letter from a reverend from Somerset, leafy Somerset in England, and he was really disturbed because he'd written in a book by a popularizer of Darwin's ideas that there probably weren't humans on all the other planets. And so he wrote in, he was very perturbed and upset. You could tell from the letter.
1903,
yeah. He was very upset by this letter and was seeking consolation from the editors of this magazine, and was like, this is surely too sweeping a statement. And the funny, it goes a bit deeper, is I looked up his ancestry, and he was actually the great nephew of one of the first astronomers to produce detailed maps of Mars. And on that map, he thought he could see moving features, which he interpreted as waterways, which was then interpreted by the scientific community. This is in the Victorian times, as confirmation that there's an intelligent species on Mars. Yeah.
Those inclinations and discoveries, revelations of the circumstances we describe here were in some ways accidental. They were accumulating over a long period of time. They're layers and layers of false starts and misapprehensions that somehow in various different ways start to congeal into increasingly more confident understandings of this dynamic as well. That dynamic is one that is sort of bidirectional. That is once philosophy figures out how to ask the right questions, then something becomes a science. And yet then the science will discover things, reveal things, disclose things, quite literally, that then change the premises by which philosophy might even occur in the first place. This is what we could call a paradigm in a historical sense as well. So could you characterize some of those moments by which, as a paradigmatic rupture or continuity, that this actually may be something we can think about now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the shift in the meaning of the word revolution itself is a really good example of a paradigm shift or revolution. So if you look to the beginning of the 1600s and through to the early 1700s, the word revolution means the orbit. So moving in a circle.
Right. Cyclical.
Yeah, like revolving. And the recurrence of the same. The idea that unprecedented change is only ever a local phenomenon is because we're not seeing the whole, because this thing has happened before, because time just cycles. And that's been a very prevalent assumption about time in the widest picture for a very long time. And so, again, if say, you're living 2,000 years ago in I don't know, Mesopotamia or somewhere, like you look up at the stars and they cycle, and it happens in a regular and predictable pattern. It's safe. It's a sensible assumption to assume that that's just how time works in the biggest possible span,
and
therefore how it would work. Terrestrial.
Yeah, and so that persisted until the at least the early 1700s, and then something interesting happens towards the end of that century, where the word revolution starts being used to mean the rupture of the completely new. People call this period the Romantic period, the very late Enlightenment, the Age of Revolutions. Of course, there's the big one, the French Revolution. There's also the Haitian Revolution. It's a time of rupture and unprecedented change. And what's really interesting is at the same time, there's an argument in the earth sciences, which were still in their kind of youth, their nascence at this point in time, as to whether nature itself operates in a steady, gradual, kind of cyclical manner, or it has these like great ruptures and step changes. And it's
still a controversy in many respects.
It is still a controversy
within evolutionary science. Yeah.
Absolutely. But you had these people that said that, again, there is no such thing as unprecedented change in the Earth system. It's just a kind of artifact of our limited view. So you have geologists as late as the 1830s saying that dinosaurs will reappear and stomp around in England in the far future. Because they thought that the Earth operates as a steady state system. Nothing is ever genuinely gained, nothing is ever genuinely lost. In the boundlessness of the time, things come and go, but nothing genuinely new happens. Whereas on the other hand, you had people saying, and they were being very empirical and looking at the data of the recently unearthed fossil record, where you have these strata where you get very different forms of life, and then suddenly it changes into another very different form of life. And if you look at that, and
which became punctuated equilibria theory.
Yeah, well, in a sense it did. And this was kind of the granddaddy of that theory in some sense. But yeah, there was this live argument that nature undergoes deep revolutions. And so to go from this idea that...
And therefore we should too.
Well, and therefore we should too. And as it's almost flippant, but maybe it isn't, to say that, was it the geological theory that enabled the French Revolution or the French Revolution that,
that's exactly the question.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it's one that in a way, we're continuing to ask today.
Indeed.
This relationship between how we understand planetary systems to work and how we might understand how we would want to construct our societies in one way or another.
Yeah. Well, and to your point on the paradigm shift, of course, that goes back to Thomas Kuhn, 1962, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. But Kuhn, and again, he when you're beginning an idea, such as the paradigm shift or the scientific revolution, you have to kind of start from the basics, and do the groundwork, and that's exactly what he did. But Kuhn remained broadly constrained to revolutions in the factual domain. So science as the thing that just tells us about what is. The thing that I'm interested in is putting that together with how accumulating insights about the external universe also continually revolutionize our sense of what must be done. So our sense of our priorities, and what we should be doing, what we ought to be doing.
Yeah.
So bringing together the fact domain with the value domain. So, you know, is there a structure to revolutions in moral worldview as well? So
yeah, so it's let's say the relation between the is and the ought.
Yeah, well, a world that makes sense and goes where we want it to go is a nice world, and so I don't blame people for previously wanting to inhabit that world. But it was the failure of that that apocalyptic worldview to deliver on its own promise again and again and again. Because throughout the medieval period, well, since Jesus, he told his disciples that they would be the last generation. He basically said, you are not going to die of natural causes. But the end that was promised, the return of Jesus, and then the apocalypse, last judgment, it failed to come, and it failed to come again and again. And over time, that deferral, that frustration of the promised moral consummation, the promised apocalypse, that was dictated by God, again, as we referenced earlier. You know, it was on God's watch. He was the conductor of the cosmic symphony. Because the conclusion failed to come, that deferral opened a space beyond God's dictatorship of not just history, but also the future, where the future could suddenly become open-ended. And rather than being, you know, its bookends being dictated by some, you know, divine authority, could begin to be dictated by human agency within the world. It, you know, as the medieval epoch rolled into the Renaissance, people began to start thinking that genuinely novel things were being wrought and invented, and it started to seem a bit more like human agency rather than some inscrutable, you know, divine agency.
So you had this Christian tradition that sort of moved beyond the cyclical time into a kind of linear progression of which there was this already foretold final ending.
Yes.
This is also happening simultaneous with a number of extraordinarily important scientific discoveries, revelations more than revolutions, perhaps, from geology and planetary sciences. And you mentioned dinosaurs at the beginning. Paleontology ended up having like a tremendously significant philosophical significance in the way in which we understood what planetary time was, and in principle, then the scale of a planetary future. You could talk a little bit about this. That there's this interesting symmetry that you've identified between the amount of the past that understood to be scientifically perceivable and the amount of future that we have. So tell us.
Great. Yeah. So I'll try and zoom out and do it all in a brief answer. So
a brief history of time and the future.
Very brief history of eternity and time. So as you pointed out, prior to the Judeo-Christian Islamo tradition, there was a sense that time was eternal. You know, when Jesus died on Golgotha, it split history in two, because you know there has to be a before and an after then that applies everywhere equally, because God's job is to save everyone's souls by sacrificing himself. And if it wasn't, you know, a complete act that cannot be done again, then, you know, God's failed, but he's omnipotent. So that broke the Greco-Roman idea of eternity where everything recurs. So you get this sense of linear time. But as I pointed out, throughout the Middle Ages, there's a sense that even if they weren't the last generation, they lived much nearer the end of time than its beginning. Then, obviously, in, say, the 1600s, 1700s, you get the birth of modern science, and people start looking not to scriptural testament to figure out where we are in time, but to the testimony of the earth, the rocks, the fossils. And so ahead of digging into the earth and actually looking, you can find very early geologists assuming that if we were to dig deep, 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 even to the core of the earth, you'd find remains of everything currently on the surface, which is to say they weren't expecting there to be evidence of change, directional change.
Over time, yeah.
But that's, of course, not what they found. They didn't find fossil humans in the deepest, earliest beds, fossil beds. They found very alien animals, and the deeper you go, the more unfamiliar they become.
So this movement in stratigraphic space was also a kind of time travel.
Absolutely. And so, you know, by say the 1800s, people know that there's been a shift in life over Earth, and they know that it took a long time. But their sense of how much time was, you know, they had no means to really put it in absolute terms. They knew it was a large amount of time, but it was kind of amorphous. And so you get to, you know, we're rushing through history here. You get to the end of the 1800s, and there's a sense that even though time is now big, it's very deep. There's still this sense that we're much nearer the end than the beginning. And that's for various reasons. One being their theory of how the solar system itself formed is the condensation of dust in space. And the idea was that the sun produces energy by implosion, so internal friction. It's a purely mechanical idea of how a sun produces heat, right? Because we're pre-radioactivity, right? Not to spoil what's coming next. Yeah. But given that model, the sun is, you know, now a kind of compact thing. So we're much later in that, you know, lifespan. So they thought we were, you know, a physicist, Robert S. Ball, in maybe, I think it was 1890 or something, said we're 4/5 of the way through our sun's lifespan. Lord Kelvin, William Thomson, another very important Scottish physicist, he was like, yep, we've got maybe a few million years ahead, several. By the end of the century, scientists were converging on like 10 million years ahead, but a much bigger past.
And is that extension of the amount of future that exists, was this roughly symmetrical with the amount of past that was seen to exist? No.
Yeah, yeah, but again, because of this wrong model of how the sun produces heat.
Okay.
So they were broadly, you know, this was still a controversial idea back then, but Darwin had convinced people that it had probably taken a lot of time to produce life's current grandeur.
But still the idea we're very close to the end.
Yes, yeah. And that was depressing because it was like, it's taken this very long period of time to get us to the point we are now, where we're thinking, life is figuring out the history of life. Right. And then there's this tiny chunk ahead. And then, as the 1900s open, people discover radioactivity. Marie Curie demonstrates that it's not radioactive processes, it's not coming from energy exchange with the surroundings, it's actually just coming from inside the atom itself.
That matter is collapsed energy.
Exactly. And it reveals that the basement of our universe is filled to the brim with like dynamite, where previously people thought it was just, you know, kind of these irreducible bits.
So the discovery of radioactivity indirectly gave us a much longer future.
Absolutely. So overnight, you get George Darwin, who was descended from the Darwin, Charles Darwin, who was descended from Erasmus Darwin, who I'm a big fan of. Anyway, so George Darwin, he overnight he's like, okay, this blows the ceiling on previous ideas of the future. So you get this complete reversal in the very early 1900s, where overnight people go from thinking that they live nearer the end of time than its beginning to thinking they might be living much nearer the beginning. Which completely reorganized. And you talk about paradigm shifts. This was a paradigm shift. And
this is early 1900s, right? So it really is also the beginning of the modern secular idea of the future in a lot of ways. I mean, this obviously not the beginning of it, but it's a moment in which futurism as such, and the compositionality of the future, the imperative of the future, and so it becomes really intrinsic to the modern project, perhaps in ways in which it had not been quite so prominent.
Yeah, well, the canvas that the future...
we had, you know, there's H.G. Wells and the rest of it before then. But there's a kind of, it's a moment.
Yeah, well, so the future, as I pointed out, it's linked to the failure of the apocalypse to deliver. And so you get a sense in the Renaissance that new things are happening, but still they couldn't falsify hunches that maybe everything happening here had happened in some lost, forgotten civilization in the past. What we needed was like a continent-spanning, cross-referenced archaeological and fossil record to show that human history hasn't just been cycling since time immemorial, that there was like a beginning in some sense.
Right. And so in this discovery of these alien worlds beneath our feet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And an understanding that like we are one essentially layer of the onion of these successive alien worlds, it implies then there are many more worlds to come.
Yeah, yeah. We lost this idea of a boundless past, and that made us see ourselves as the baby civilization that we are.
Yeah.
So, you know, you get this sense of the future is liberated by bounding the past, because it means that new things, genuinely new things, can be wrought and discovered, but also unprecedented challenges can be in that opening future. And the future is opening because it has grown over time. And to get back to the future point, yes, you have, you know, this idea of an open future leads to your Vernes and your Wells.
Yeah.
And, you know, the early science fiction authors.
Marinetti, for the minute.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But he was writing post-radium. So that was the vibrant era. Yeah. But then, yeah, you get this, you know, radium completely switches people's sense of where we are in time, goes from nearer the end to nearer the beginning. And the canvas of what the future was, which was big for Verne and Wells relative to their ancestors, and that's an important point to remember. But that canvas just explodes.
Yeah.
It's now just leagues better, fathoms better than it previously was. And that is what opens the imagination. It coaxes the imagination much farther out.
So we've run through the history of life and ideas, and we've caught up to
brief history of time.
Brief history of time. We've caught up to the present. Let's talk a little bit about the open canvas of the future. This may seem like a bit of a leap, but actually it's not, as I think of it. It's around what the cluster of technologies that we today call artificial intelligence. How do we draw those linkages together in a way, and how would we use them to draw something on this canvas of the future?
Well, I mean, I think a great example of it is one of my favorite plays, Brain, A Play of the Whole Earth by Lionel Britton, written in 1930. And it talks about the emergence of artificial intelligence. You know, he calls it a mechanical brain, but we can now recognize that as artificial intelligence. And yeah, he talks about that as a planetary phenomenon. It's the planet reorganizing itself into a brain. And it's very outlandish, and it's very disturbing by our lights now, because this was, you know, in an era where it was still viable in the West to be sympathetic with Stalinist forms of totalitarianism. And in this play, Britain relishes in the liquidation of human individuality. We become neurons, atrophied neurons in this global brain, and he likes that, which it makes for alienating reading in our, you know, kind of, post the mid-century atrocities era. But you know, all of that said, it's interesting because there is this history where, and it goes back to this crazy idea, cephalization, which was coined by an American geologist, James Dwight Dana, in the 1840s. He was looking at crab evolution, and he came to describe their evolution as over and above their shrimp-like ancestors. What crabs do as they turn into crabs is their abdomens shrink and their brain cases expand. And so, you know, the legs are now just this tiny thing underneath, and you get the, you know, exaggerated mandibles and the pincers, which he thought were coming from the cephalothorax. So he saw that, and then he's like, they're doing the same thing that we did. Because if you look at our ancestors, they have much smaller brains compared to us. And so he was like, all evolution is tending towards...
Actually not, as it turns out.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was
more recently, but yeah. We have bigger prefrontal cortex.
Exactly, yeah. Well, he was, you know, more broadly, he was looking for patterns that he wanted to see.
But the idea is that matter essentially wants to become a brain.
Exactly.
It's all sort of, there's a kind of, the teleology is towards cephalization in one way or another.
Matter like, reorganizes itself into a brain.
Well, it turns out like matter made people so that people could make matter into a brain. That's really what AI is.
You know, after this geologist proposed this idea, it took hold. It became quite popular. Darwin hated it, which I find amusing. But it did become popular, particularly in American evolutionary science. And people noticed that the telegraph cables recently connecting you know, America and Europe, transatlantic cables resemble nerve fibers, and they actually do. If you cut them in half, they look like nerve fibers inside us. And so they thought, well, we have nerve fibers connecting the hemispheres of the planet.
But it was nerve fibers. I mean, like neurons, as I understand it, like this wasn't really, I mean, it's 1920s.
Yeah.
Before we started like really messing around with those.
Well, so, you know, there was like a very rudimentary sense of neurophysiology though back then. But yeah, so they were like the planet itself is cephalizing, and and that's what led to the play that I mentioned, and there are plenty of other examples in the early 1900s. You know, that go far beyond Vernadsky and Desjardins, who are like the familiar, you know, kind of figures in the canon of like planetary intelligence. But limiting it to them would be a bit like limiting the history of cosmology to Galileo or Newton. There have been plenty of other people. I
mean, there's another way of thinking about planetary intelligence that might be, you know, closer to a couple of the people that we work with in the Antikythera program, Sarah Walker and Adam Frank and others, where like the argument that they make is that intelligence is a planetary phenomenon. Like it takes a planet to eventually over time build the scaffolds that become the scaffolds that become the scaffolds that eventually becomes the rarefied forms of matter that are capable of these feats of abstract cognition and so forth. It's not necessarily that it's all moving towards this as a gravitational pull, but it doesn't just spontaneously emerge in some
absolutely
pool
not
somewhere, something like this, and then set it on its way. Like it takes, in the same way in which in Gaia theory, the emergence of life, early life produces an atmosphere which makes more complex forms imaginable, which and so forth and so on. Like all of this essentially becomes scaffolds that are required on this as well. So even the intelligence that we claim to enjoy in the present, it still in essence contains that whole history that goes along with it. And so this may be another way of thinking about how the intelligence is always planetary. It takes a planet.
And so to zoom out, you know, to the bigger picture, let's think about two possible futures.
Please.
One of them, life remains locked on Earth. There's potentially 1 billion years further of habitability for complex metazoan life. Maybe humans aren't there anymore. Maybe they are. For as long as they, you know, remain. Most mammal species live a few 100 million years.
And that's it.
And there's some further evolution. Maybe there's some, you know, charismatic megafauna. Again, some big mammals. Maybe something else. But then that's it. You know, there's 1 billion years more life there. But if life does somehow go beyond, our galaxy is going to be around for a lot longer than that. A lot longer. And it's the wider cosmos itself is going to remain capable of hosting complex life for an unimaginably longer time. And so if you like biodiversity, which one of those futures contains more biodiversity?
The much more biodiversity is possible through moving through into sort of the galactic development in the same way there would be biodiversity once you escape the petri dish.
And if humans or their technological children, being robots or post-biological forms of life, are the things that make that happen, then maybe you just have to have an instrumental value for them being the kind of ignition switch that might let that happen. Because I like life, you know, like going back to the beginning of the conversation, the Burgess Shale, like Anomalocaris, Opabenia, these amazing animals. And so if we can get 1 million Cambrian explosions going on 1 million worlds, that excites me. I think that's a much better future than those worlds remaining barren, rocky wastes where the most interesting thing is potentially orogeny, or the formation of mountain ranges, which, you know, not to denigrate that, but it goes back a couple of decades at least, is the idea that we now recognize that, you know, all life on Earth very likely shares a common ancestor. So we're all built on this fundamental biochemical basis, you know, DNA.
Somewhat controversial, but yeah.
Yeah, no, well, that's why I say it's very likely. So the paleontologist David M. Raup in the 80s called this a bioclade. It's everything descending from one common ancestor. but we now know that there are like many more possible biochemical bases for life. So
some of which we can observe and some of which we
can't. So who knows how big that possibility space is?
That's right. Yeah.
But then that leads to the question.
So that multiplies the question of biodiversity.
Well, yeah.
Even beyond in a different sort of way. It's a different, far larger diagram of possibilities.
It is, but so if we could then start manifesting things from that space, that would be interesting. But the question then arises, though, is how do we know that we are the best of all possible bioclades? So
we wouldn't need to, would we?
Well, yeah, because then if we could artificially bring more into being, then that would be great. But that does give me pause in this idea of spreading our bioclade, because we'd then potentially be blotting out of the future of the universe potential ones that could emerge but simply haven't yet already, if you follow what I mean.
I do follow what you mean, yeah. But I mean, just in terms of the ways in which Earthling migration seems to be going, it's robots.
Yeah, well, I still think,
which is already a very different sort of starting point.
Of course, yeah. I still think that we're probably the best shot in this, cosmic neighborhood for making that biodiverse or biotechnodiverse, or let's, remove that distinction entirely, perhaps, of making that happen, like the ignition switch, as I say.
But this is a wonderful project, isn't it?
I think so.
I mean, it's an optimistic project. It's an open project.
We should should also be cautious, because transhumanists talk of there being an opportunity cost for every second that we don't spread outwards, because we're wasting energy that could be used on spreading outwards and creating more, as they say, value structures. And fair enough, but there could be an opportunity cost in us spreading outwards, because we are stopping other bioclades from emerging. But as you say, though, if we could artificially bring those into being, then I don't see a problem there. Yeah.
I mean, there's probably many of these, but one of the, I think, the very important, profound differences between, I think, what you're suggesting and what we often hear from the transhumanist community is essentially like the presumption is that the forms of life, that the layers of life, the alien worlds to come in one way or another would be just as different from us as the ones that we see in the past, right? And that there's nothing peculiar or necessarily ideal about the human diagram that we sort of see now, which is so much of the transhumanism, the discourse which sees, in a way, it's a kind of neo-Vitruvianism, where like the human is a kind of already established, finished project that simply needs to be amplified.
Yes, multiplied
and amplified. And obviously, it's not everyone, but I mean, this is a really important kind of distinction here as well.
Yeah.
Any last final thoughts of anything you'd like to sort of leave us with in terms of, I mean, one of the images in my mind at the very beginning was you with the book with the dinosaurs, and thinking about later the dinosaurs. We're the dinosaurs potentially for another kid in the future looking back, some sort of book.
Yeah, I'd love that to be the case. Yeah. I guess like a final point is, the kind of the big picture of what I'm trying to kind of, put forward at the moment is, we're talking about paradigm shifts, right? Revolutions, intellectual revolutions. And the thing with them, there's an interesting dynamic where it takes a while for the dust to settle before we can see the landscape changed. And so with Copernicus, it was several generations until people were talking about a Copernican revolution. It took a while for people to notice what he'd wrought. And so same with deep time. People now look back to James Hutton and Georges Buffon. But it took a while for them to figure out that we'd discovered deep time. The word emerged in the 1980s.
Right.
So we had the discovery of deep space with the telescope, the discovery of deep time with the geologist's hammer. But there's a discovery of deep possibility, I think, that we're currently undergoing. And it's in the sense of the discovery that the possibility space is so large, the ways in which everything could have gone, and therefore the ways in which everything still can go, are just unimaginably vast. And throughout the past, people assumed that the space available or the time available was so large that everything that can happen will eventually happen, which removes history from the picture, right? Because history enters the picture when not everything that can happen does happen, such that making certain decisions has consequence and has bite and has legacy. Whereas if everything just happens and happens again, the influence of the past on the future disappears, history disappears.
Yeah.
But I think that the picture that we're currently putting together through, learning about deep time, deep space, evolution, is that, and again, assembly theory as well, is that it takes a long time to create complicated things. To make a complicated organism, it takes a very long time. And when complicated things emerge, they create more possibilities. They're more complicated. They have more affordances. They have more options ahead of them.
Yeah.
And so as it takes time to create more complicated things, there are more possibilities in the universe. And you can imagine that accumulation of greater and greater possibility actually outpacing the amount of time available and the amount of space available, such that history is an irreducible component of our cosmos. So in a sense, it might become, you can't just like brute force with the amount of space and time available, all the possibilities. I think our universe might actually be capable of becoming more and more complex in an actually genuinely open-ended manner.
So the question then is like, maybe just to the last point then on this, we're on the question of the paradigm and our pre-paradigmatic moment in this, like the paradigm that is emerging then, or would need to emerge in order to even give comprehensible shape to that scope of possibilities one way or another, would have to have, would itself be considerably more complex, be able to sort of have a level of comfort and degree of facility with complexity in order to even model that larger space of potential complexity one way or another. And that may be something that the forms of augmented intelligence we get from the machines may sort of allow for in one way or another. But in any event,
as a closing remark, to let that continual complexification happen, maybe we do need to kind of go somewhere else. And at the same time, if the microscope and the telescope is what revealed deep space to us, the computer is what's revealing deep possibility to us, because it allows us to replay times tape and see all the different ways things can go. Simulation. And so in the same way, we look back at Galileo and we see the telescope as the thing that inculcated that paradigm. I think people might look, if things go well, people might look back
at artificial computation.
Exactly.
As the way of sort of modeling the potentials of that complexity of possibility.
Silicon Revolution.
Love it. Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Futurology is a Studio B and Waveland production with distribution from Realm. Our executive producers are Nicholas Berggruen, Nathan Gardells, Dawn Nakagawa, Nils Gilman, and Jason Hoke. Futurology is produced by Grant Slater, Alex Gardells, and Natalia Ramos. Our associate producer is Alyssa Mardini. Futurology's theme music was composed by Marcus Bagala. The show is mixed and mastered by Aaron Bastinelli. Special thanks to Heather Mason, Olivia De Rienzo, Carly Migliori, and Nick Goddard.